Hello YouTube. In this video, we're going to get on the topic of something that was asked a ton on this channel and I'm very happy to be able to discuss with you guys. And it's going to be nucleus overload. This is something that I have a lot of personal experience with, even though when it happened to me and when I ran the method, I didn't even know what I was doing. So I can give a pretty good perspective on the topic. As far as what it entails in terms of scientific values, I'm not going to discuss that in too much details. I do think that you should go on Team 3D Alpha's channel. That guy, Megan, has accumulated a lot of videos and resources on the topic. He's very thorough with his research. He knows what he's talking about. And if you're looking for scientific explanation as to what is going on with the so-called nucleus overload, that's where you should go. I will not be making videos on that because it would just be plagiarizing what he does basically, and I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in giving you my experience and sharing knowledge that I feel a personal connection with. If there is a topic that I don't know about, I will guide you in the right direction. I will give you resources, but I'm not going to talk on the topic because I think it's just not my place. As far as nucleus overload, what it is exactly is the process of hypertrophying a muscle with a certain technique. Now, understand that hypertrophy doesn't have any magical hidden secret behind it. We understand it pretty well. That being said, there are certain aspects of it that are very underrated and underutilized, and nucleus overload principles are one of them. What do we talk about when we say nucleus overload? Nucleus overload is a term coined by Team 3D Alpha. I will explain later why it's called that. It's a pretty ingenious term for the method. What you will basically be doing with nucleus overload is you are going to use very lightweight for high repetitions, and you are going to basically overload the muscle with volume. Now, in this video, I'm not going to talk about the commonly accepted methods of running nucleus overload. If you want to hear about someone else's take on it, you can go directly on their channel and ask. I'm going to tell you how I do it and how I've done it in the past and what makes sense for me in terms of programming. So, you are usually going to use lighter weight for higher reps. And as I've discussed on this channel before, this is not usually a method that you want to employ for hypertrophy. Why? Because it is not conducive to progression. It is not going to be time effective, and it can also result in an inability to push the tonnage in the long run. But there are other aspects that come into play when it comes to nucleus overload. In this video, we're going to talk about what it is, what it represents in terms of volume, frequency, and tonnage, and also how you can start to implement it in your program the way I do it, basically. In the rest of the series, it's going to be a 3-part series. We're going to talk also about which body parts you can actually target very effectively with it, and which are going to be strictly more difficult to hypertrophy through that mean, and the methods you should use, because tension on the muscle can be created through various different means, but there are several means that are much better for nucleus overload practices. And the third part of that is going to be my personal experience of nucleus overload when I did it against my will, quote unquote, and when I did it on purpose, and I'm going to explain what I'm doing right now for it. And also, and something that to me is the most interesting part of it, is sports applications of nucleus overload, meaning that a lot of what Megan and Team 3 Alpha has discussed on the topic is also the fact that nucleus overload can happen outside of the realm of bodybuilding, and in most cases it does. It is something that impacts athletes more. And that's going to be a very interesting talk that we're going to have, but it's not for now. For now, understand that the name nucleus overload is a catchphrase. It is a buzzword. It is the name of a product. The reason why it is named that is A, it's catchy, 2, it sounds scientific, 3, it is interesting, meaning that it's going to build up a certain level of anticipation in people who want to learn more about it. The real name of nucleus overload should be high frequency, high volume, low intensity training. But that's not sexy, that's not marketable, it's too long, and it also is too general. So calling it nucleus overload was a genius move by Team 3D Alpha and Megan. Why? Because if you say nucleus overload on YouTube, everyone knows what you're talking about. People might not know who was the father of the term, but they know what it refers to. As far as the science part of it, I said before that the method was potentially subpar for hypertrophy. We're going to, right off the bat, discuss the number one reason why people say that it doesn't matter. People say, and science tends to show, that a muscle that is exposed to that type of low intensity, high volume, high frequency training accumulates more satellite cells, which themselves create more nuclei in the muscle, which promote muscular fibers and the hypertrophy of the muscle, meaning that when you destroy and you break the fibers and then they recover through the nutrition you provide, the oxygen, etc., having more nuclei is going to promote higher states or status of growth in the muscle. Now, is it true? I don't really know, and I don't care. I'm not going to conduct a research. I don't have a case study that I want to experiment with, so it's not going to be relevant. But it might explain why it is efficient, because in my opinion, it is efficient. It is something that works. So why does it work exactly? How come a method of applying intensity and volume to a muscle that results in subpar tonnage is so important and is so beneficial? It is because, if you've watched my hypertrophy series, you already know about it. Tonnage within the right intensity window is important, but there are more variables to that. Tonnage and the notion of junk volume, meaning that tension you apply to the muscle can be completely useless if not done within the right intensity window, is not 100% correct. Any tension applied to the muscle is going to result in muscle hypertrophy. The reason why we want to stay within a certain intensity window is because we want to push progression. And the reason why we want to push progression is because it's going to be a good way to gauge muscle hypertrophy, because if you get stronger, your muscles are getting bigger. That being said, nucleus overload, at least the way I practice it, does not really concern itself with progression. You're not really trying to get stronger. You're trying to keep doing the same thing and keep pushing volume into the muscle. What does that mean practically? It means that the intensity is going up because you're increasing the volume, which in return increases the intensity within the set. Well, I'm not talking about practical methods yet, but you're going to understand as we go. If you do a set of 40 easy reps, the intensity of the first rep is vastly different than the intensity on the 10th rep, which is also different from the intensity on the 12th, the 20th rep, etc., etc. And the last reps you're going to do are high intensity. So why is that set still not worth it in terms of intensity if the last reps are actually really hard? It's because if you compound every single rep, the total intensity at the end is not that high. If you do a 3-rep max, even though the first rep is easier and therefore lower in intensity than the third rep, the total amount of the 3 reps is still going to be vastly superior in terms of intensity. But if you manage to get those two notions together and then compare tonnage, you might think that you got much better tonnage doing the nucleus overload type training instead of the strength work. So why don't we just do only nucleus overload training? Well, one, because as I said, it's not really going to be practical for progression, it's going to be very hard to track, and also it's going to be strictly inferior in terms of uh, the time tracking and also the time efficiency of your workout. If we had to do 50 reps per set for each set, you would be in the gym forever. So, nucleus overload needs to be used as an accessory. It cannot replace your main work. It should never replace it. It should be used in correlation with strength work. So that's what it means pretty much in terms of volume and intensity. This is how I apply it. You're going to stand within a rep window that is going to be on the far the far right of the rep scheme, meaning that you should stay between 40 and 50 reps. And this is going to also create a pump. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but the pump is also going to be a part of the nucleus overload experience. Why? It's going to be very beneficial for your mind-muscle connection. This is also a part of nucleus overload that is under discussed, but is very important. Outside of the fact that it does potentially create more room for the muscle to grow through nuclei, it's also going to create a connection that makes it so that when you do your strength work, you're going to be strictly more aware of the muscle and you're going to feel it working much more. Now, whether that is going to promote muscle hypertrophy or not is not established yet, but I think it does. I think a bigger muscle is a muscle that is easier to feel. There are going to be certain counter arguments for that part. It is very possible to have a very big, very strong muscle that you have no connection to, but as far as catching up on a weak point, creating a connection with the muscle is never going to be a bad thing. So, as far as where in the workout you should implement the nucleus overload, I am not of the mindset that you should do nucleus overload cycles. If you want to follow what Team 3D Alpha says you should do, meaning that nucleus overload should be their own thing and then they should be followed by a certain amount of rest to allow the muscle to fully recover and then hit the muscle to get the gains, that's on you. If you want to do that, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I personally think that it is not the best use of your time. The beauty of nucleus overload is it's not taxing, meaning that it's going to burn, yes, it's going to you're going to feel a peak contraction of the muscle, etc. But it's not going to tire your cardiovascular system. If it does, you really have bad cardio. It's not going to impact your strength on the strength work too much. And it's also going to be something that is easy to recover from. I will discuss that in the part 2 when we talk about the body parts you should be targeting with nucleus overload. But most of what is going to be your main goal is going to be smaller muscle groups, which in my opinion you should work more frequently because they recover faster. Again, that's a topic from a different video. I don't want to go on a tangent here. But the way I personally recommend you implement nucleus overload is use it as a superset in your program, and you can use it on antagonist days, meaning that if you do a squat, now is a good day to do some nucleus overloads for your triceps. That way you also know that you're not cannibalizing some energy and strength that you could actually be using on the press. Because if you do a close grip bench press and on the same day you do nucleus overload for the triceps, then understand that there might be some gains you're leaving on the table in terms of progression with weight on the bar. It might tire you out. So just do that on the lower body day. Same thing if you're going to do a nucleus overload for your calves, for example. Then you might not want to be doing some Olympic weightlifting on the same day, or you're going to go into a calf extension to get the weight up. These are just things to keep in mind. You can play it like you want. The opposite is also true. Let's say you're going to do some pulls. You can superset the pulls with some very high reps, low weight, neck extensions, for example, because you're going to use your neck on the pulls, but a tired neck is not going to reduce your ability to pull. That's personally what I'm doing. It's all a game of experimentation. And you have to experiment. Never follow what someone else says because you're going to find yourself to be very disappointed. Use the principles that are being given to you and apply them and switch them around to see if it works. But as far as the ability of the muscle to grow through that practice of nucleus overload, I can say with confidence that it works. I personally like to stay, for me, with certain body parts in certain rep ranges that I'm going to discuss later. But for example, for my lats, I stay between the 6 to 10 rep range, but I just do a ton of sets. For the triceps, I do less sets, but I do 40 to 50 reps, etc., etc. I adapt it. All of that to say what? Nucleus overload is not magic. Nothing in this sport of bodybuilding is magic. When you do nucleus overload, you do something that people have done for a very long time. Meaning what? It's high volume, high frequency training with low weight. The low weight is a given because you're not going to be able to do high rep, high frequency training if the intensity is too high. And intensity, if the volume and the frequency are already set at a very high pace, is not going to be high. You cannot do that with high weight because the intensity would skyrocket, you wouldn't recover from it, etc., etc. This is why we stay with the lightweight, this is why we on purpose do something that at face value is not going to be beneficial in terms of the time we invest. It's because it is actually something that should not replace strength work. It can be put on the side as a superset. And in that way, it's not going to be time consuming at all. It's not supposed to lengthen your workouts. That is, if you do that within the workout. I know that some people like to do them outside before they go to bed. With feeder workouts, that's a completely different topic, but keep in mind that what people call feeder workouts are essentially nucleus overload. And that's something we're going to discuss later. But I want you to keep in mind that just because you're not pushing heavy weight does not mean it doesn't create results. Take, for example, the potential knowledge you can gain from fat people. If you've ever met guys with big calves in the gym, it's usually dudes who are overweight or who used to be overweight. What does that mean? It means that walking every day and having their calf carry their body weight every day eventually resulted in hypertrophy. If you think about it, those guys don't go to failure. They don't have to stop during the day because their calves burn too much. They never even reach that point of exhaustion. And yet the calf still grows. What does that show us? It shows us that a muscle that is being subjected to tension throughout the day, even if it never reaches failure, even if it never experiences high intensities, will still grow. And that is true across the board. Now, the fact that those muscles also stay big after the person loses the weight is another argument I'm going to use later, but it goes to show that it is a method that is not completely useless. High volume, low weight works. The reason why, again, we don't want to do that is because if you do that for every body part, you're going to spend your life in the gym. Think about what these guys have to do to be able to get their calves that big through what is essentially nucleus overload. They have to work all day. You don't want to have to work a body part all day for it to gain size. So we use certain strategies to put more stress on the muscle that is going to result in a gain of time, and we use a strategy that is not going to be too taxing on the system so that we can repeat it every day throughout the week. Now, the frequency of the nucleus overload is also going to be up to you. You can do it every day, but as I said, if you want that practice not to cannibalize your strength work, you might not be able to. For me, for example, I use my triceps to press or to extend every 2 days, which means what? I won't be able to do the tricep extensions high rep for nucleus overload every day. I'm going to have to do it on the days where I'm not doing pushes or presses. So I do it every 2 days. Same for my lats. I don't want to do nucleus overload on days where I'm going to use my lats to pull. So I'm going to do it on the days where I do overhead press or bench where I don't use my lats that much. This is all a strategy. This is how you use nucleus overload intelligently instead of making it your everything, because it cannot be your everything. Also keep in mind that a lot of the detractors of nucleus overload do not understand the benefits of it strictly because they don't need it. PED use throws a wrench in the practice. Why? Because it has been shown that using PEDs without even working out increases the amount of nuclei in your muscle. So people who do that, who use these products, have no use for the nucleus overload practice. Not saying that it wouldn't do anything if they did it, but they don't have to. Just like if I gave you a pill that would make you get stronger without working out, you wouldn't have to do strength work. Why? Because your potential for strength would go up, meaning that your ability to do more variation, accessories, and volume for tonnage would go up. So you could just skip the strength work and it would make you gain time. Those guys can skip that. They can skip nucleus overload. Also, because, and I don't blame Team 3 Alpha for it, because the practice in itself has been sensationalized a lot, people think they're going to get insane results quick. The basis of nucleus overload is that you're going to stack low quality volume for such a long time that eventually the fact that it's subpar is not going to matter as much, because you're going to accumulate so much tonnage that the fact that it's not at a high intensity won't matter anymore. It's going to range in the million, in the tens of millions of pounds of tonnage, which is going to create the hypertrophy you're looking for. But A, it takes consistency. B, it's sort of boring because you're not really progressing. What the progress is going to take part on your strength work and on the rest. You should not strive to progress on the nucleus overload. You can throw different variables at it. I will explain it in other videos, but you shouldn't treat it as strength work. It's not, the goal is not to progress in it, because it's a completely different part of your training. 3, it takes a super long time to see results. And in my case, I would even say that unless you've been doing it really strategy for like 4 or 5 months, you won't get results. And based on your frequency and the amount of reps and sets you're going to do of nucleus overload, it is going to be strictly different from individual to individual. So you have to keep that in mind. It's not a magical practice. It is definitely worth it. I have personally noticed a change in my lats, a change in my triceps. It is effective. You cannot take that away from the practice. It is effective. But at the end of the day, it's, as I said, high volume, high frequency, low intensity training. So now that we have pretty much explained everything that is to be explained about the practical use of nucleus overload, in the next installation, I'm going to tell you the body parts that you should be targeting, why certain body parts are going to be very hard to target, and the means with which you should target them to maximize hypertrophy and minimize injuries. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.